Hello my fellow wizards. So clearly this is not one of my normal videos, but I wanted to try something a little different. I've been playing Wiz for a long time now, all the way back since the good old year 2009. I remember when things were a bit different around here. Anyway, in all this time, I've never paid much attention to Wizard101's perhaps lesser known but no less beloved sister game, Pirate101, except for like one time 5 years ago where I stumbled through half the tutorial then quit because it wasn't wizardy enough for me. I've always kind of wanted to give Pirate101 an honest try, but up until now, things in Wiz have kept me pretty busy. But then, over the holidays, the perfect opportunity presented itself, and I realized it was now or never. KingsIsle made all of Wizard101 and Pirate101 free for a limited amount of time, and I figured this was my best shot to get a decent idea of what this game was all about without having to spend a dime. It was time to finally set sail in Pirate101. Here are some of my first impressions of the game, with the limited time I had to try it as a Wizard101 player. My hope is that this will give other Wizard101 players a decent look into what this game has to offer and maybe convince them to give it a try as well.
You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of.
But you have heard of me.
From the beginning, Pirate101 drops you into the middle of the action. From the start of the tutorial, your new pirate is bursting out of the brig with Boochbeard and Mr. Gandry giving you tips along the way. You make your way through a burning, crumbling pirate ship and come face to face with your first set of enemies, the Armada. I loved these guys instantly because they look menacing as heck with their masks and also kind of gave me like Bioshock enemy vibes in a weird way. Is that just me? Anyway, right from the start, I found this tutorial section to be more interesting and dynamic than Wizard101's, where you're basically thrown into a random tower in Golem Court by Ambrose and told to fight Malistaire with no real context for what's going on. While pretty simple, I found that Pirate101 does a pretty good job giving you the basics of combat, especially since it is such a departure from Wizard101's combat, which is strictly about selecting spells from your deck. Character creation felt pretty similar to Wizard101 in that you get a somewhat limited amount of different faces, skin colors, and hairstyles along with your default gear colors. I did think it was pretty rad that you get to create your very own pirate flag for your future ship, and there were tons of colors, symbols, and background patterns to mix and match. One other interesting but confusing aspect of character creation is picking your background and history from several different options. While at first this seems like just some background flavor for your new pirate, these choices can actually have far-reaching consequences that the game doesn't really tell you about. Depending on the choices you make, you can get different types of stat bonuses for your pirate, which can have an effect on your character depending on the class you chose, especially if you plan on PvPing later where every minor stat boost matters. Another major effect is that one of the choices affects what type of companion you get hours later in the game, which can obviously directly impact your playstyle and future strategy a great deal. For those wondering, apparently the best background tends to be Krakatopia because it increases your spell power by a decent percentage, which is used as a damage modifier in most types of skills. I would advise new players to look into the consequences before selecting their character's background choices, so you don't have an unpleasant surprise later when you don't get the companion or stats you wanted. I do think these types of permanent choices are a lot to throw at a brand new player with no background knowledge, so I do wish they gave you more context for what effects these choices will have. Once you get into the main game, it becomes apparent that there is even more customization to be had. If you look in the crown shop, there are tons and tons of customization options for your character, from face paint and eyeglasses to different types of masks for your character to wear. Seeing all the character customization that Pirate101 has to offer, it does make me wish Wizard101 had a little more variety in the types of purely aesthetic choices you can make to help your wizard feel unique. Looking through the crown shop, there are also a wide variety of mounts, pets, outfits, and types of weapons you can purchase as well to customize your pirate much in the same way as Wizard101. A couple negatives I did notice about the crown shop in Pirate101 is that most of the items are only available for crowns, whereas in Wizard101 you can get a decent amount of things and even mounts for gold. Pirate101 suffers from the same issue with microtransactions as Wizard101, so I do wish both games would consider offering more items, houses, and gear for gold, even if it is a high amount, as an alternative to crowns-only options. The Gold for Crowns tab is also present in Pirate101, which was a major disappointment since it is a pretty bad deal in both games and feels like it preys on inexperienced players' lack of knowledge. I did notice, interestingly, that many mounts overlap between Wizard101 and Pirate101, but many mounts that are only available in packs or seasonally in Wizard101 are available outright in Pirate101.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
Anyway, let's move on to the real game changer between Wizard101 and Pirate101, the combat. From the get-go, it feels like there's a lot more strategy options to be had in this game. While yes, you're still picking abilities or spells from a somewhat randomly drawn hand of cards, positioning and the environment play a role in this game in a way they never could in Wizard101 due to the limitations of the battle circle. While there is 100% a level of satisfaction from stacking blades up in Wizard101 to deliver that massive hit after a few rounds, Pirate101's combat spices things up in new ways that are just super fun to play around with. There are so many different types of abilities, from stealth, buffs, and direct melee, to ranged attacks like guns and spells, and counterattacks that the whole battlefield is often utilized, and you need to pick your priority targets carefully. Do I take out the big tank in front, or try to sneak around to assassinate the high damage spellcaster in the back first? The environment also comes into play with objects that can block attacks and spells, and different character abilities that can actually allow you to leap over annoying obstacles if need be. Companions change the entire dynamic of play so that you are no longer a lone wizard with your limited batch of spells, but a pirate with a whole crew to build up and direct around the battlefield. Your companions have different abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, and can be manually positioned or put on auto attack depending on your preference. I mostly left them on auto for my time in Pirate101 because they do fairly well on their own without direction, and with a limited timer, I often found myself running out of time if I manually directed them every round. I also loved that not every single combat in Pirate101 is just about killing the enemy as efficiently as possible, although there certainly is a lot of that. Certain dungeons give you other objectives to finish a fight, like destroying environmental objects or assisting certain NPCs who then join you in combat. This added a freshness that I didn't realize was missing from Wizard101's boss fights. Another thing to note is that unlike Wizard101, you do have some control over the likelihood of certain abilities appearing in your hand first, with abilities you place near the front of your deck being more likely to show up early in the fight. Also, rather than getting loot directly from killing enemies, you instead loot treasure chests which spawn around the room, which I found kind of fun, though it did get a little tedious after a while. Overall, I found the difficulty of combat to be fairly easy, although I'm sure difficulty ramps up at higher levels. I never died in combat, and only a few times did my health get low enough for me to worry about it. Some boss fights had enough bite to keep me on my toes, but the slightly easy difficulty didn't really bother me since the combat alone was satisfying enough to keep me interested. Without a doubt, the combat is one of Pirate101's best assets when it comes to attracting new potential players. Now let's talk more about your companions. Depending on the class you pick, you're given a specific companion right out of the gate to assist you on your adventures, and you soon pick up several more along your first few quests. These companions all have different classes and abilities that you can mix and match to have better chemistry with your own character. One of the first things that struck me about your companions is that they often talk to you.
We need to warn Mordecai. He needs to know about the threshers.
Or speak up to comment on a particular situation. I loved this because it really made each of them feel unique and interesting as characters and made me care about them, rather than just seeing them as faceless pawns to be moved around the battlefield. Companions also have personal quests as they level up, which you need to upgrade their damage and abilities, which again gives them more personality and background story. Pirate101 feels like it's trying to lean more heavily into the classic RPG genre with these choices, and even though I was playing alone most of the time, having my companions interact often made me feel less alone, and more like I was part of a true pirate crew. It was a pleasant surprise that I was not expecting, and though my crew talked fairly often, it never felt intrusive or annoying, unlike some other video game companions.
Hello! Hey! Listen!
You can also level your companions up with training points you acquire from various quests and by leveling up yourself, but something the game doesn't tell you is that you can get more bang for your buck by holding on to those training points a little longer. The higher your level is compared to your companions, the more experience each training point is worth to level your companions up closer to your level. So, if you wait until your character is, say, 2 or 3 levels higher than your companions, you can level them up more with less training points. The game doesn't necessarily tell you this, so this can help you save a lot of money and time grinding training points later on. One other difficulty I did find was knowing which talents and skills I should pick when leveling up my companions, since it's not immediately clear what stats are priority for which classes. I highly recommend new players look up guides on each class so they know which types of talents to prioritize. Gear in this game works pretty similarly to Wizard101 in that you can buy a lot of gear from the bazaar as soon as you level up, but the best gear needs to be farmed from dungeons and their respective bosses. As I mentioned earlier with my companions, I did struggle initially to know which stats would most benefit my swashbuckler early on, but after a little research I learned that generally agility was going to help me out most. It also seemed that the best gear dropped from bosses were ones that give you an extra ability to use in combat. For instance, I received clothes early on that gave me an additional swashbuckler attack and later received a witch doctor spell that gave me some ranged options. Having these additional abilities to play with certainly helped speed up combat a lot. Overall, however, you can expect the same gameplay loop as Wizard101, where you gain some levels and then seek out new, more powerful gear as you go. However, if you don't feel like a ton of farming, you can do pretty okay with just bizarre gear. Now, let's talk about another part of combat and travel that is totally unique to Pirate101, your pirate ship. Spoiler territory here, the game sets you up to think you're going to get an amazing grand pirate ship, but of course, instead you get a pathetic little skiff at the beginning. However, you quickly start to upgrade your pirate ship until it's a true beauty to be proud of. It's very cool to see other people's ships sitting in the docking area or flying around outside, and made me want to upgrade my own ship as quickly as possible. You know, to help, compensate. You can change a lot of different elements on your ship, including your anchor, rudder, sails, armor, cannons, figurehead, wheel, and more, all of which give your ship a unique look and abilities in flying combat. I will say, while I loved flying around to new destinations on my ship, the combat itself is definitely a little lackluster after a while. For most fights, you basically just fly up to an enemy ship and then sit in one spot and spam 3 or 4 ability buttons on cooldown until the other ship explodes, or you can board the ship and enter a scaled down version of traditional combat to defeat the ship's inhabitants. I found myself mostly just blowing up the other ships since you still get rewarded for things like fetch and defeat quests, and it's faster. I'm glad they give you ship combat to play around with, but it gets pretty dull after the first few fights, and I think there's far too many ship-related find and defeat quests. I definitely recommend using the airstreams to get to your various destinations faster, since the ship also has a limited boost option, and oftentimes new quests have you going back and forth between 2 locations that are quite far apart. Also, use your teleport ability liberally when you know you have to go back and forth between 2 locations a lot, because flying the ship back and forth across multiple skyways can get tedious pretty fast. Next, let's talk about another major selling point for Pirate101, the world and the story. The game does a great job giving you a number of different and exciting places to explore as you travel around the skyways on your various quests, while always keeping the setting feeling appropriately pirate-themed. From vine-laden skyways and ancient ruins to haunted pirate ships and well-guarded fortresses, Pirate101 always feels spot on with its choice of setting, and it's obvious how much fun the developers had with these locations. Dungeons in particular feel very satisfying to explore, and Pirate101 in some ways often feels like it has more environmental awareness than Wizard101. For instance, early on you can enter a sewerway with alligator mobs hidden underneath the waterline, but at some point in the main quest you can drain the water permanently and have a much easier time spotting and avoiding the mobs, which felt like a refreshing change from Wizard101, where you don't have a ton of effect on the environment at any point. One thing that did annoy me was the lack of teleporters in the environment. It can take an incredibly long time to travel through some of the areas, even with a decent mount, and it's a nightmare if you're walking without a mount. By the end of my 10 or so hours playing, I was getting very frustrated with the amount of time it was taking to get to different quest locations. Yeah, a lot of the time it was like my April Fool's video all over again, except this time for real. Yeah, just look at her go. The early story that I did experience was very enjoyable and made me want to keep playing to see what happens next. Mild early game spoilers ahead, but I thoroughly enjoyed the idea of chasing Ratbeard from place to place and witnessing his narrow escapes along the way, or trying to figure out clues in order to beat him to his next destination. It was very satisfying to receive him as a usable companion after spending hours chasing him down. I thought it was a smart choice on the developers' part to avoid info dumping too much with dialogue, but instead using story cinematics to tell larger chunks of story in a way that was more engaging than just listening to tons of dialogue from a static character. I also enjoyed the subtle connections to Wizard101 that were slipped into some cinematics and dialogue on occasion, since it made both games feel more interconnected. I also liked that after logging on and back in, you would sometimes be greeted with a short summary of what you were up to last time you played, from courtesy of some of your companions, since it made it feel like I was returning to some great epic story that was playing out over time. Okay, let's talk about a couple of miscellaneous tidbits, including the UI, pets, and PvP, amongst other topics. Compared to Wizard101, where you can adjust the UI by several different sizes, I found Pirate101's menus to be incredibly small and difficult to read. It's quite hard to read stats when changing gear, especially in the Bazaar where you may be sorting through hundreds of different gear options.
What is this? A center for ants!
I also noticed very quickly that there is no option for borderless window mode, which for me is a huge turnoff. These types of options are staple settings in any modern game, and I was surprised and disappointed that these very basic quality of life options are not included in the game. I I found that even when I tried to Alt-Tab out of the game to switch to a different screen, my game would freeze up and have to be rebooted, essentially leaving me unable to look up things online mid-game or use the awkward regular Windows mode, which feels rather clunky. I didn't have much time to delve deeply into the pet system in Pirate101, but from what information I did gather, it seemed like they function in much the same way as they do in Wizard101, as bonus gear that can boost your stats and give you an extra edge in combat. However, also sadly like Wizard101, the pet training and breeding system also appears just as convoluted and RNG focused. When you're just starting out and have very little gold or other resources, it is difficult in both games to really use the pet system effectively. I will say that knowing how long it took me to only semi-master and understand Wizard101's pet system, I was in no hurry to try out Pirate101's system. PvP. Unfortunately, this was another system I did not really experience and can't give fair commentary on. I don't PvP in Wizard101 either, and so I have no idea what the PvP system is like in Pirate101 or if it's fun, fair, or balanced, though I can certainly say that Wizard101 is currently struggling to adjust its own PvP system to everyone's satisfaction, so I do wonder if Pirate101 is in a better or worse position in this area. Housing feels very similar to Wizard101, with your pirates starting out with just a small room to decorate, but with the ability down the line to purchase far bigger and more expensive houses, both with gold and in the crown shop. The decorations and furniture I received while questing were appropriately pirate-themed, and I had a lot of fun placing things in my room. However, I did notice there was no advanced movement option for placing items like Wizard101, which is a huge loss for decorators who want more control and precision when moving items. Finally, I'd like to talk about multiplayer and the number of players in Pirate101. While there has been fantastic news on the horizon that Pirate101 will be receiving new updates and attention after years of neglect and inactivity, it's no secret that this game has a smaller player base than Wizard101. In Wiz, you can expect to see a regular stream of people, especially in the first few worlds, and you can definitely always find people socializing in the Commons, Pet Pavilion, and PvP Arena. However, Pirate101 feels pretty empty by comparison. I saw a few people here and there, especially in the starting hub of Skull Island where you first start your adventure, but I rarely saw anyone past the first few quests. In fact, during my entire 10+ hour journey questing, I was only able to successfully team up with people once for a dungeon, one of the first dungeons you enter on Skull Island. But despite dozens of attempts to find teammates in later areas, there was no one ever there to play with. This was also frustrating when I'd see group plunder chests in the overworld, which require multiple people to open for the treasure inside, since there was no one around to help me open them. I think the ability to play through dungeons with other classes of pirates would have made my time in Pirate101 that much more enjoyable, so I'm pretty disappointed I essentially had to solo everything.
The gang's all here.
I'm hopeful that as Pirate101 starts getting updates, that more people will return to this game or discover it for the first time. While it needs a bit of polish and attention, Pirate101 truly is something special and unique, while still feeling familiar to Wizard101 in many ways. The tactical combat, interesting story, colorful world, and dynamic characters really make this game shine, and I hope that more people are willing to give it a chance. I'll certainly be returning to it at a later date, once I actually get around to maxing my main wizard, that is.
That's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen.
So it would seem.
Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. As always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing.